I never thought I'd spend more on a laptop than I had on my first car. But there I was clutching the receipt for a $2,400 machine like it was both a victory and a gamble. Every dollar had been scraped together from late-night freelance gigs, side hustles, and skipping luxuries my friends took for granted. For months, I'd eaten instant noodles more times than I could count, quietly watching my bank balance inch its way toward the number I needed. That laptop wasn't just a purchase, it was a symbol of every sacrifice I had made to prove to myself, and to the world, that I could build a career on my own terms. The big pitch was my chance. A panel of investors was flying in from out of town, looking for fresh talent and disruptive ideas. My project was bold, some said too bold, but if I could get even one of them to see its potential, doors I'd only dreamed of might finally swing open. Every chart, every animation, every line of code I'd worked on lived in that laptop. Without it, my presentation would be nothing but nervous hand gestures and vague words. With it, I had a shot at showing the kind of professional I wanted to become. The only problem was, I lived under a roof where none of that seemed to matter. My father believed in hard work, yes, but only the kind he understood. To him, stability was king, a government job, a paycheck every month, something he could explain to neighbors without raising eyebrows. My world, startups, design, pitching to strangers about ideas that didn't exist yet, was alien to him. In his eyes, I was wasting my time chasing fantasies on a screen when I could have been studying for an exam that led to a real career. Every evening when he came home from work, the same pattern repeated. He'd see me hunched over the glowing laptop, headphones on, lost in my own universe of slides, code, and research. And every evening he'd find a way to remind me that I was building castles in the air. "Do you think money grows on trees?" he'd ask, looking pointedly at my laptop as if it were mocking him. "This is my work, Baba," I'd reply, though my voice usually sounded more defensive than confident. "Work? Work is what puts food on the table. Work is what makes a man dependable. This?" He'd wave dismissively toward the screen. "This is just playing around with toys." The irony, of course, was that this so-called toy had cost me more than anything I had ever owned. It wasn't just a shiny machine, it was my toolbox, my canvas, my office. But I didn't expect him to see that dot. Still, it stung. No matter how much I tried to ignore it, his words planted seeds of doubt. Sometimes, after long nights of preparing my pitch deck, I'd close the laptop and wonder if I was just fooling myself. What if he was right? What if all this effort was just leading me nowhere? And yet I couldn't stop. Every time I thought about quitting, I imagined the moment my idea would light up that conference room. I imagined investors leaning forward, nodding, seeing the potential in me that my father never did. That image became my fuel, pushing me past exhaustion, past fear, on the eve of the pitch. As I looked at the sleek laptop sitting on my desk, I felt a surge of pride. It wasn't just a machine. It was proof that I had bet on myself when no one else would. Proof that even if my father couldn't understand, I was building something real. Of course. I had no idea how quickly that proof could be destroyed. The day before the pitch, I woke up with a nervous energy that felt like electricity humming under my skin. Every detail of my presentation had been rehearsed, revised, and reshaped until I could practically recite it in my sleep. My slides gleamed with polished graphics, my data points were double-checked, and my delivery had been practiced in front of a mirror so many times that even the awkward pauses had a rhythm to them. The laptop sat open on my desk, its screen glowing like a portal to the future I wanted so badly. I kept running through the presentation one more time, then another, tweaking transitions, adjusting font sizes, rechecking the backup files stored on the cloud just in case. But still, it didn't feel like enough. No amount of preparation ever felt enough when everything I dreamed about was riding on 20 minutes in front of strangers. Downstairs, the sounds of my father moving around the house grew louder. He was always up early, a creature of routine. I heard the familiar clatter of cups, the creak of the front door, the heavy sigh he let out when he picked up the morning paper. For a moment, I hoped he'd leave me alone, that maybe, just this once, he wouldn't come upstairs to check on me in that way that wasn't really about concern, but about criticism. I wasn't so lucky. By mid-morning, I heard his footsteps coming toward my room. The knock was sharp and impatient. "You're still at it?" His voice carried through the door before I even answered. I opened it a crack. "Baba, tomorrow's the pitch. I need to make sure everything's perfect." He looked past me into the room, his eyes landing on the laptop. "Perfect? You've been sitting in front of that thing for months. If success came from staring at screens, every child with a phone would be rich." I clenched my jaw, fighting the urge to argue. I'd learned long ago that explaining my world to him was like explaining color to someone who only saw in black and white. He wanted stability. I wanted possibility. We were speaking two different languages. Still, his words gnawed at me. He made it sound like all the sacrifices I had made, the sleepless nights, the missed outings with friends, the money I'd poured into this machine were foolish, meaningless. And yet, I couldn't bring myself to shout back. I simply nodded and said, "It's important to me." That answer didn't satisfy him. He muttered something about wasting my youth and left the room, shaking his head. I tried to refocus, but my chest felt tight, my pulse loud in my ears. Tomorrow was supposed to be my chance to prove that I wasn't wasting my youth, that I was building something bigger than either of us could see. By late evening, I had rehearsed until my throat felt dry and my eyes burned from staring at the screen. Still, a quiet thrill buzzed beneath the nerves. I was ready. For once, I allowed myself to imagine what life would look like if everything went right, if I impressed the investors, if I got the funding, if I finally had something solid to hold up to my father and say, "See?" I wasn't wrong. Before going to bed, I placed the laptop carefully on my desk, plugging it in to charge overnight. I looked at it one last time, the way a soldier might check their weapon before battle. Tomorrow, it wouldn't just be a laptop, it would be my voice. My proof, my future. I didn't know then that by morning, everything would change. The morning of the pitch began with a strange sense of calm. I woke earlier than usual, nerves and excitement tangled together, but determined not to let either overwhelm me. Today wasn't just any day, it was the day. The day I would stand in front of people who could change the trajectory of my life. I washed up, dressed carefully, and even ate a light breakfast, something I usually skipped when I was too anxious. For once I felt almost grounded. That is, until I opened the door to my room. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. My desk, usually neat and organized, was a mess. Papers scattered, a coffee mug overturned, and in the center of it all my laptop. Its once sleek silver body was streaked with dark stains. Its screen cracked down the middle like a lightning bolt frozen in glass. The smell hit me next. Bitter, acidic, unmistakable. Coffee. My breath caught in my throat. No. I rushed forward, fumbling to lift the laptop, shaking it gently as if I could undo what had been done. Drops of brown liquid dripped from the keyboard, and when I pressed the power button, nothing happened. Not even a flicker. The machine that had carried months of my work, the machine that had been my lifeline, was nothing more than a lifeless shell. "Baba!" My voice cracked as it tore out of me. Louder than I intended, he appeared in the doorway a moment later, holding his half-empty thermos. He didn't look guilty. If anything, he looked annoyed. "What is it now?" I held up the laptop, my hands trembling. "What happened here?" He glanced at it, shrugged, and said, "I must have spilled my coffee when I came in earlier. You should keep that thing out of the way." His words landed like a slap. Out of the way? This wasn't some cheap gadget I could replace at the corner shop. This was $2,400 months of sacrifice. Sleepless nights, every ounce of determination I had poured into my dream. It wasn't just a machine. It was everything. "You ruined it," I whispered, my voice breaking. He crossed his arms. "It's just a laptop. Maybe this is a sign you should stop wasting your time with all this nonsense. You spend too much of your life staring at screens instead of doing something real." For a moment I couldn't breathe. Was it an accident? Or was there more behind the way he brushed it off so casually, as if he'd done me a favor by erasing my work? My father had always disapproved, always found ways to belittle what I was trying to build. But now, whether out of carelessness or something darker, he had destroyed the one thing I Needed most, I felt heat rising in my face, a mix of rage and despair. Do you have any idea what you've done? My pitches today. Everything I've worked for, it's all in there. His expression hardened. If your future depends on a toy breaking, then maybe it wasn't much of a future to begin with. The words sliced through me. My chest tightened, my eyes burned. For a fleeting second I wanted to scream, to break something, to let the fury erupt. But all I could do was stand there, clutching the ruined laptop like a corpse, realizing the full weight of what had just happened. The clock ticked on. In a few hours I was supposed to be standing in that boardroom, pitching my idea with confidence. Instead, I was standing in the ruins of my work, my father's indifference echoing louder than the silence of the dead. Machine in my hands, I thought it was over, but something inside me refused to let this be the end. For a long, paralyzed moment, I just stood there, staring at the ruined laptop in my hands. The cracked screen reflected my face in fragments, broken into pieces, just like the plan I'd spent months building. My mind raced with panic. The slides, the animations, the data models, everything I needed to impress the investors gone. I could almost hear the sound of opportunity slipping through my fingers. I wanted to collapse. I wanted to scream until my voice gave out. But as I stood there, chest heaving, a different voice cut through the chaos, the one that had carried me through late nights and long setbacks before. If you give up now, it really is over. But if you fight, you still have a chance. I set the laptop down carefully, almost reverently, as though it were a fallen comrade, and forced myself to think. There had to be something I could salvage. I checked my phone, my hands trembling as I opened my email and cloud accounts. Relief surged through me. There it was. A backup. Not the polished final version, but most of my work had synced automatically. The animations and refinements were missing, but the skeleton was there. I didn't have my powerful machine anymore, but I did have something. The only other computer in the house was my father's old desktop in the study. A relic, slow and wheezing with age, its screen scratched, its fans louder than a jet engine. But when I pressed the power button and the familiar hum started, I felt a surge of stubborn determination. If this is all I have, then this is what I'll use. The files took an eternity to download. Every click felt like wading through molasses. As the minutes drained away, I realized I couldn't rely on polished slides to dazzle anyone. If I tried to replicate what I had lost, I would fail. I needed to change my approach entirely. That was when the idea struck me. What if the very disaster I was facing became the centerpiece of my pitch? What if, instead of pretending everything was perfect, I showed them how I adapted under pressure? Investors didn't just back ideas, they backed people. They wanted resilience, creativity, the ability to survive setbacks. And right now, I was living that story in real time. I grabbed a notebook and began sketching. I outlined my key points in bold handwriting, drew diagrams with thick markers, and created a rough storyboard of my vision. My slides would no longer be the star of the show. I would be. My voice, my conviction, my ability to pivot under impossible circumstances, that would be what set me apart as I worked. Anger gave way to a kind of exhilaration. Each messy sketch on paper felt like reclaiming power from the chaos. I rehearsed aloud, pacing the room, imagining myself standing in front of the panel with nothing but a whiteboard and my passion. For the first time, I realized that the polish of my laptop might have been a crutch. Without it, I had no choice but to strip everything down to its essence. And maybe that was exactly what the pitch needed. By the time I gathered my notes and packed them into my bag, I was exhausted but strangely calm. The investors wouldn't be getting the glossy, high-tech presentation I had planned. Instead, they would see someone who refused to quit even when everything fell apart hours before the pitch. I glanced once more at the broken laptop on my desk. A part of me still ached at the loss, but another part whispered, "This might be your chance to show what you're really made of." And with that, I left for the pitch, not with perfection, but with purpose. The conference room felt colder than I expected, the kind of chill that seeps into your bones and makes you doubt yourself before you even open your mouth. A long polished table stretched out before me, flanked by men and women in tailored suits. They had folders in front of them, pens poised, eyes sharp and unreadable. These were the people I'd been preparing to impress for months, and all I carried into the room was a battered notebook, a marker, and my determination. When I walked to the front, I caught a few curious glances. No sleek laptop, no projector setup, just me and a stack of hand-drawn notes. I felt a flush of embarrassment creep up my neck, but I straightened my shoulders and forced myself to breathe. Don't apologize, I told myself. Own it. Good morning, I began, my voice steadier than I felt. Before I dive into my pitch, I should tell you something. A few hours ago, the laptop that held my entire presentation was destroyed. Everything I thought I'd show you today gone. A ripple of surprise moved across the table. One of the investors arched an eyebrow, another leaned forward. I could almost feel them bracing for an excuse. But instead I smiled. That forced me to rethink everything. And I realized if the success of my idea depends only on polished slides, then it isn't strong enough to stand on its own. So today, I want to share with you the heart of the vision, stripped of the polish, the way I believe in it. With that, I opened my notebook and began. I sketched diagrams on the whiteboard as I spoke, translating complex processes into simple shapes and arrows. My hand-drawn models might not have been slick animations, but they were raw and clear, easy to follow. Instead of hiding behind transitions and bullet points, I told a story why the problem mattered, how my idea solved it, and the future I could see if it was backed with the right support. At first, I worried the room was too quiet. Their pens tapped, their eyes narrowed, and I couldn't read their expressions. But as I spoke, I began to see small signs, someone nodding at a key point, another jotting notes furiously. When I explained how the morning's disaster had forced me to adapt in real time, I leaned into it, using it as a metaphor. This, I said, holding up my notebook with its messy sketches, isn't what I planned. But innovation rarely goes as planned. It's about how you adapt when your plans fall apart. If I can pivot like this in a matter of hours, imagine what I can do with the right resources over months or years. That was the moment I felt the shift. The skeptical expression softened into intrigue. A few investors exchanged glances, the kind that said we weren't expecting this. But it's interesting. By the time I finished, my voice was strong, almost defiant. I closed my notebook, looked each of them in the eye, and said, "What I'm asking you for isn't just funding. It's partnership. And I believe the way I've handled today is the best example of why I'm worth backing." For a moment, silence filled the room. My heart pounded so loudly I thought they could hear it. Then one of the panelists smiled, the kind of smile that carried respect. "I have to say," she began, "in all my years sitting on panels like this, I've never seen someone handle a setback the way you just did. That's the kind of resilience we look for." The tension drained out of me like air from a balloon. One by one, others nodded, chiming in with thoughtful questions, not about my lack of slides, but about the substance of my idea, and as I answered, I felt something shift inside me. For the first time, I wasn't just trying to prove myself to my father or to the world. I was standing in my own power. By the time I left the room, I knew, whether they said yes or no, I had won something far greater. The hours after my pitch blurred into a haze of waiting. I sat in the lobby with my notebook clutched to my chest, the adrenaline slowly wearing off and leaving behind an exhaustion so heavy I could barely keep my eyes open. My mind replayed every moment. The cracked laptop, my father's dismissive shrug, the way my voice had trembled at first before finally finding its strength. When the investors called me back into the room, my pulse quickened. I tried to read their faces, but they gave nothing away. One of the senior panelists cleared his throat. "We've reviewed your proposal," he said, "and we want to commend you. Not only for the strength of your idea, but for the way you presented it under extraordinary circumstances. That kind of resilience tells us more about your potential than any polished slideshow ever could." I felt my breath catch. Another leaned forward. "We'd like to back you. The amount isn't small. We believe your idea has legs, and more importantly, you have the grit to see it through." For a moment, I couldn't move. The words hung in the air, almost unreal. Then the reality struck. They were investing. Not just in my idea, but in me. My chest tightened, and I had to blink back the sting of tears. After everything, after months of sacrifice, after this morning's disaster, after my father's contempt, I had done it. When I finally walked out of that building, contract papers in hand, the sun felt warmer, brighter, as if the entire city were celebrating with me. I stood on the sidewalk, letting the noise of traffic wash over me, my notebook still tucked under my arm like a badge of honor. The broken laptop hadn't ended my story. It had lit the fire that made it unforgettable. That evening, I returned home. My father was in his usual spot, the television humming, his expression unreadable when I walked in. He glanced at the notebook in my hand, then at my face. "Well?" he asked, his tone clipped, almost defensive. I set the papers on the table. "They're backing me, fully." For a long moment, he said nothing. His eyes flicked from the documents to me, and though he didn't smile or congratulate me, something shifted in his gaze, something quieter, less certain. He gave a small grunt, the kind he used when he had no words but couldn't deny the truth. Then he turned back to the TV, pretending not to care, and strangely, that was enough, because in that moment I realized I no longer needed his approval. For years I had carried the weight of trying to prove myself to him, hoping one day he'd see my work as real, as worthy. But now I understood, his recognition wasn't the prize. The real victory was proving it to myself that I could stand, adapt, and succeed even when everything collapsed around me. That night I sat at my desk, the ruined laptop still there, its cracked screen catching the lamplight. I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt gratitude. Without that disaster, I might have walked into the pitch hiding behind glossy slides instead of standing in my raw conviction. Without that failure, I might never have discovered just how resilient I could be. I reached out and touched the broken machine gently, almost like a relic. It wasn't the end of my story, it was the beginning, and as I prepared for the long road ahead, I carried one lesson with me. Sometimes, the very thing that feels like sabotage is the spark that forces us to rise higher than we ever thought we could.